everybody. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And on the podcast today, I have Alex R. Johnson, who is an acclaimed filmmaker and screenwriter. And he's making his fiction literary debut with Brooklyn Motto. It's a gritty, noir-inspired mystery set in the 1990s in New York City. Really excited to talk to Alex about his book and his career. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I have to tell you, so you had a very successful career as a filmmaker and in screenwriting. So before we get into all about your book, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what got you to storytelling and what led you from film to writing a novel?
Uh, sure. Well, I've always, since I was a child, the goal was to be a writer. And always writing, always trying to start a novel when I was younger and would let imposter syndrome overtake me and would abandon it. But then when I studied film theory, moved to New York and, did a lot of film, freelancing. And then I got hooked up with, Maisels Films, they're kind of like they were the kind of grandfathers of cinema verite, doc style stuff, and I sort of started this career in documentary as kind of like a day job. But I was always writing scripts and always trying to write short stories and doing all that stuff at the time. And then I started directing and made the shift into when people started to finally kind of pay attention to my work, which it's a struggle. No one wants to be the first person to say you're good, so, so
Yeah.
you gotta you've got to convince people. And so after that happened, and I made my first film called Two Step, which is this kind of Texas noir. Um, that premiered at South by Southwest and it's done really well critically, financially. As far as you know, it did great. Um, but so yeah, and so that started my career as a screenwriter and what I maybe my own naivete about the kind of like studio system was that I thought I'd make, I don't know, every other script I wrote would get made type of
Mm.
thing, and what you quickly learn is that you can have a career in Hollywood at the studio level and honestly have nothing get made. Um, and so when I made the switch from studio to independent, it just, I don't know, I came from DIY kind of independent filmmaking, and so I'm used to like every day being like, what can I do today to try to get this production a step closer to getting made? And then you get to the studio system and you realize you can't do anything. It's just the gods are, bowling in the sky, and you're just waiting. Um, so, I did originally plan this as a TV show, this book, and back kind of at the kind of like as peak TV was kind of peaking. And but I don't know, I had kind of I kind of had a half-assed pitch and I pitched it to my agents and they didn't see it. And they tried to talk me out of doing it and I got really, a little defensive as a writer can get sometimes. And I was like, well, I'm doing it anyway. Um, and it's sort of just started to seem like a novel. I don't, obviously don't do first person in screenplay work.
Mm.
And as I was putting together all my notes for it, the first person voice kind of came out, and then it was also like deliriously intoxicating. I don't know, just first person can be, after never writing first
Yeah.
person can be really, fun is an easy way of saying that. But but yeah, I mean, I was always, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it was like a easy peasy way for me to get into writing. I mean, I was, an established commercial producer for 10 years and trying to get attention. You know what
Mm.
I mean? And then it wasn't until I got my screenplays into some labs, and some workshops that had some clout that people started to pay attention. But even that was a struggle. So But anyway, so what happens is, so you get in the screenwriting world and you're writing these screenplays and you fall in love with the world and you fall in love with the characters and you think of all the potential and then you sell it and you're paid for it. Most of the big money you get is if it goes into production. They kind of back end all those bonuses. So you can have a very, a good living, but not like you're rolling in cash or anything like that. If nothing gets made. But what happens is if it doesn't get made, you lose the world.
Mm.
You just lose it. You can't do anything with it. And in the United States, screenwriters, years ago, in the 60s, I think, when the Writers Guild, we agreed to losing our copyright in exchange for healthcare, basically. And so that was the negotiating tactic that the studios were like, well, then we have to have the copyright. We'll pay for your healthcare, but we have to have the copyright. So that that gets frustrating, when
Mm.
you create worlds and they're gone. And if an idea comes to you later about a script that got abandoned and you can't pursue it. Um, so this was, I got excited about writing the book, because it was thrilling to me and it's something that I'd always wanted to do since I was a child and, avid reader. And B, to know that it's mine. It's my world, and whatever happens with it, the characters, I can continue with these characters in another form if I want to.
So it sounds like a little more freedom, a little more liberating, maybe than the film.
Yeah, a little more freedom, a little more liberating, just a little slower process.
Yeah,
But I downshifted
yeah,
into the prose speed.
yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I read in your bio, and I know this is more on the film thing, but I've always heard about that. What's it called, the blacklist or something? Not the where like the great scripts go or something that never get made. Can you tell
Yeah,
us
so
about that? That's so fascinating.
sure. So Franklin Leonard, I forget who he was an assistant to years ago in the 90s, and somebody famous. And he just sort of got obsessed with the best scripts that weren't getting made. And so he back when he was just an assistant to somebody, organized this concept of like, let's have all the studio heads vote on the best scripts that got written that year that didn't get made. And so he organized that. And so it's been going on since I think the late 90s, maybe the early 2000s. And in 2016, my script, Northeast Kingdom, that we sold to Paramount, that Michael Bay's company was supposed to produce, it made the blacklist. And so what happens is, they call around and the studio executives, they vet them. So it's actual studio executives. They're given a limited number of votes and they can just assign and then they just tally up all the votes. And then I think it's about 40 or 50 scripts a year approximately. I don't think there's a set number. But yeah, so it made that list. They now have they've expanded into kind of an online system where there's still the studio blacklist that happens every year, and then there's kind of a collective screenwriting thing. You can pay to be a member, and you can critique. You can get other people to critique your work, and they can critique yours, and you can vote. And then they have their own kind of like ranking system on that list as well. But I was on the studio one.
Hmm.
And that's one of those and whether or not that's made, if I always say I was on the blacklist, that's one of those ways that going back to nobody wants to be the first person to say you're good. I can say I was on the blacklist and then, I can get a meeting or I can, at least get an email address and try to sell myself.
Huh. Well, that's fascinating. And so, with regards to your writing for books, novels, who were like some of your literary influences? That did you like crime thrillers and growing up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I grew up, I grew up a government brat. My dad was FBI, my mom was CIA, my godfather was DEA.
Mm.
And they were all obsessed with crime. My parents had crime books all around. And so I used to read, and spy stuff. But my biggest like influences as an adult are probably easily Richard Price. Uh, Nothing makes me happier than the
Mhm.
announcement of a new Richard Price novel coming out. And Elmore Leonard, certainly.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
Like Gold Coast is right up there, one of my main influences. I think both of them have such a um they both have they're both so good at setting the tone and the pace that they want you to read at, which I just love. I love that's how I try to write both in screenplay, and that's something I learned in screenwriting from reading like really amazing screenwriters like Alex Garland's screenplays are just, he just sets the pace, just the way he writes and sets the pace as to how he wants you to read the script. And that's what I really that's a goal. That's always been a goal and kind of like how I write is to try to create a rhythm or a beat.
And so, what was how did Broken Motto come together? On like, what was the process from when you first started getting the idea to having a
Yeah.
published book out?
I started to I wanted to I just love, I love detectives. I'm one of those Columbo freaks. I have, the apartment is filled with Columbo, posters. They used to release those show the TV movies as movies in Europe, and so you can get some really great European Columbo posters, movie posters. But I love the idea of the reluctant detective type of thing, and I was starting to think about that and kind of trying to find it around the kind of like a roundabout way into detecting. Kind of like a detective that's doing stuff that almost they're bored with. And I also was interested in doing something about being like 28, kind of in that moment when you are still feeling slightly invincible, but you're starting to realize that you got to get it together a little bit. So it's really that moment in life where you're going from passive to active. And so I thought, well, is there a way to, find a way to have a detective that somehow fell into it through temping, because that's such a part of your 20s, at least in New York, it was for me, in between production gigs and things. And the detective is he started off just as an office assistant at a law firm at a tiny little, kind of bus stop ad type lawyer law firm, and their main contract is with the city. And so the idea is I was trying to think of really boring investigative things, and contracts with the city seemed pretty boring. So the idea is that anytime a city employee has an insurance claim over a certain amount, it kind of triggers an automatic stakeout kind of thing. Like if it's about an injury or. So basically for like 48 hours, this guy would just go out and photograph, take pictures, try to get, this guy picking up things that are heavy or, jumping on a trampoline or going dancing or something to kind of negate the claim. And so that's where he is at the beginning. And he's a little bit of a curmudgeon, and not sure what he's doing with his life. And, I liked the idea of a big case kind of coming to him and him having to have to make the choice to step up and, start investigating. And so that's what happens. He's following a police officer who's obviously dirty, which he doesn't realize until the night goes on, doing kind of like cash pickups at various vice locations across the city, across Brooklyn. And then he goes back to his house and he's about to call a night when two other cops show up and they kill him. And he has it on video. He has it on videotape, but it's through a window. It's kind of like the gun flashes and he knows these cops have killed him. And so he goes to his boss and what the boss decides to do about it kind of starts to unravel everything. And he's forced to decide if he's going to investigate or if he's going to just kind of like run away. And so he chooses to investigate. And it's kind of that moment. It's kind of, and it's also narratively timed to that moment of being, individuating, figuring out who you are, and making those choices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating too and pretty cool. You said it in 1998, so this is before phones and everyone has a camera in
Yeah.
their pockets
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
video camera. And what made you pick? You're very specific too. 1998. What made you pick that time frame? And
It's well, there's obviously there's very big personal kind of like aspects to the story in that I've never written with a character that's sort of similar to me in any way, shape, or form. I don't know why I always thought it was kind of like cheating. but it's really stupid that I thought that way. I remember hearing a Gary Steingart interview where they were giving him crap for having another protagonist that was of Russian descent in New York, and he was a writer. And he was like, why the hell not? Like I wanted, so that's what I feel comfortable making some of my characters. That's my world. And I was like, yeah, why the hell not? And so I kind of wanted to investigate my own family, which is, half Ecuadorian and half Irish and from Queens. And so, um, as as people in as my relatives die, as there's less people to ask questions about who you are, you know. So then you're kind of forced to ask yourself those questions, and so the book was in some ways trying to figure that out. So in that way, I just kind of selfishly picked 1998 because that was about when I was that age, and I knew I wanted to um, continue the story over the next like 10 years in terms of like things that happened in New York. And I didn't want to start it too early and I didn't want to start it too close to 9/11 because it becomes such a dominating, just tonally and emotionally, it just affected the city in such a way that I wanted to get a couple of stories out before we hit that. Um, but so there's that, and also I found, and then so I knew I was going to do late 90s, and then I found a date book of mine from 1998, pre-phones, just because I used to do freelance film production and commercial production, and so you get put on hold, and you'd have to
Mhm.
like block out dates and stuff, and so you don't get double booked, and so I used that, and then also I had like rock shows I went to and dates or things I thought were dates didn't end up being dates, and movies and shows and stuff like that. So I was able to kind of put my head back into it in some ways. And then I ordered some Village Voices online, from 1998 and just kind of like seeing the ads and just kind of the muscle memory of all that stuff. It all kind of came flooding back to me. Um, so yeah, I mean, it was pretty selfish. That's why I did it. It's probably the furthest back I can remember, clearly. So, yeah, there's
Yeah.
that.
So you have a lot in common with Nico, right? With your character, Nico Kelly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the genetic makeup. I didn't
Yeah.
want to kind of like go there. Like Nico's father is a heroin addict or was a heroin addict and a failed musician. Um, my father was, a
Yeah, a little different, right?
pretty high-ranking FBI agent for most of his life. So yeah, so there's that, but yeah, it's really just kind of the genetic makeup, and specifically like being half Ecuadorian and not generally looking. People don't generally think I'm Ecuadorian. They generally think I'm either Jewish or Italian American, and there's it's almost like you're privy to a lot of kind of more overt racism, not directed at you, but that you witness by people. And so I always, I mean, yeah, I wanted to kind of like explore that a little bit. So there's all that stuff, but the family makeup's different. I mean, all the narratives kind of, but I leaned in on location, especially because I needed to remember it. So I leaned in on locations that I knew both in my family's history and personal. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like your background because we're pretty similar on that. Because my mother is Costa Rican and I was born in Costa Rica, but
Hmm.
everyone looks at me and Alan
Yeah.
Peterson and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
My middle name is Raphael, but I don't, nobody ever does that.
yeah. So that's when I saw that on your bio, I'm like, oh my God, he's just I can relate with that one.
yeah. Yeah. It's just, so I had, on like the Irish side of my family, I just, you just, with the stuff you witness, you're just kind of like, ugh, you know.
Yeah.
But even family members telling you jokes and Latin, like bad Latin jokes involved with a punchline is kind of like racist Latin stuff, and you're just like I am half, I
Yeah.
am half, like, and they're just like, oh yeah, God, oh God, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So I was kind of interested to like with regards to so obviously Brooklyn is a huge part of the story, and you live in Brooklyn, right? Is that
I do.
okay?
I do. So my family's from Queens. Um, I live in Brooklyn. I moved to Brooklyn shortly after like anyone, you live when you move and you're young, you in the city at least, you go where you can afford. You're bouncing around and, your new apartment every year or whatever. But then when my wife and I settled in Brooklyn in Park Slope, and but then we did leave for 10 years, 10 brief years. We went to Austin, and my wife had a job opportunity in Austin. And for me, it's a very big filmmaking town, and there's a lot of filmmakers there, and it's close enough to Los Angeles. It was actually very convenient to go to meetings and deal with stuff in LA. So we went to Austin for about 10 years, and it it didn't. I enjoyed it. It's a great place to visit. I love the people I met and that I socialized with, and I love the filmmaking community there. But it's also just it's not. It's Texas, even though it is Austin, and I'm a New York person, an East Coast person, and so it never really took. And during COVID is when I started writing the book, and that really, COVID really kind of like highlighted that we didn't have family in Texas. And the original plan was to move further west to LA eventually for my work. And it just made no sense to move further from family,
Mhm.
as once COVID made it clear that, occasionally there's going to be a global pandemic and you're going to want to be close to your family. So I kind of escaped back into New York in the book. And but we had always been kind of talking about trying to figure out when to come back. And then we came back about 3 years ago. And literally initially moved right back into the same neighborhood at Park Slope, which was terrifyingly weird because everybody was 10 years older. And I recognized everybody. And I'm like, certainly, surely I do not look 10 years older than these people, right? Um, and then we moved to another neighborhood, a new neighborhood, to kind of like it felt weird being in the same neighborhood after 10 years gone. But now we're back, and Texas in some ways feels like a little bit of a fever dream. But there are still aspects of Texas that I love. I still always write. I'm doing something now that is a Texas true crime story that I'm working on, and I mean, I do love Texas is like one of those places that feels, I don't know, makes you believe in folklore exists in America. Like there could be an undiscovered thing somewhere because it's this mysterious,
Yeah.
world. But Brooklyn is home, and I'm really happy to be here. And like my sister and nephew were just visiting yesterday, and we all went to go see the Mets and all that stuff I couldn't do,
Mhm.
when I was in Texas. So I'm happy to be back.
And so I'm kind of curious now about your writing process, your writing style. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Are you like do you outline? Are you a disciplined type of writer, or is it like chaos?
Oh, chaos. I'm sticking to the same writing. Literally, I mean, it's not a, like I'm going to be the first person to tell you this style, but creative writing, sophomore year, Rick Cannon was my teacher in high school, and he taught us the concept of, the spillage page. And so whenever you did like creative writing in his classes, you do an essay, you had to turn in three things. You had to turn in your spillage page stapled, and then your next page was your first draft, and then your next page was your final draft. And so the spillage page, the concept of the spillage page kind of became what drives me, which is basically, a document that you're not allowed to erase, right? If you write the stupidest thing on it, you can't, you got to teach yourself to not be embarrassed by it, because no one's going to see it except you. And if they do see it, you're dead. So who cares? So I do that. So I do a spillage document, even with screenplays, and it's just almost stream of consciousness, bits of dialogue, and I have a bunch of documents for various projects that I'm kind of trying to develop. And I get that to a good meaty length. So I feel like I have enough energy and kindling to get the story past the setup and into kind of, the get the momentum going. Um, so and in the process of writing Brooklyn Motto, like I said, I was starting it as a TV show, and I was just doing my general spillage page, but then I started, I really need dialogue. I need to hear the characters start talking to figure things out. It's a big kind of like forward backward. process. You have to just be okay with rewriting and the time it takes. It's not good for Hollywood. They don't
Mm.
like it because there are people that can just crank out these analytical treatments, beat boards, and then this happens, and then this happens. And I can't. Like, I literally would have to like write the script and then pull a beat board out of the script I write. So I was doing that, and that's how kind of the first person thing. I was doing some dialogue, and that's how the first person thing kind of came in. So yeah, so I do that, and it's worked for me. It's sloppy and can get chaotic,
Mm.
but that combined with the need to hear dialogue, like I have to hear the characters start talking in my head to kind of figure out where I'm going.
Mm.
Yeah.
And what about what's like the actual tool that you use? Is it like a Word or something different or?
Well, it's like I just use Word.
Mhm.
But I'm rethinking it now that there's this whole subscription software
Everything's
subscription
prescriptions now.
you gotta use now. Yeah, I just use Word. But you know what I do a lot is in that kind of my spillage pages, I've kind of transferred to a notes app.
Mm.
So I just use it on my notes, so it's sunk up with my phone and my laptop. So I'll be in bed and I'll just open up my spillage and I'll stick a
Mhm.
bit of dialogue down or something like that. But when I wrote the book, I wrote it in Word, and that's mostly out of not knowing any better.
Mhm.
I think I learned about Scrivener through episodes of your podcast.
Mhm.
That's how out of touch I am. But yeah, so I'll probably look into that. But I've never been good. Like, I use Final Draft for my screenplay work, and I know there are better screenplay writing programs out there, but they're all just like, cards and colors and all this stuff. And it's so I just want to write,
Yeah, you gotta do what works for you because yeah, if you get yeah, it can be overwhelming if you start seeing all the other stuff, the
Yeah, I mean, it's
software.
like when I was in film production, I was no, I got out of editing because every 6 months there was some new technology that was coming in that you had to learn, and I was like, oh, well, writing, it's just words, but it's
Mhm.
still there's new stuff all the time too.
Yeah. And do you try to get like in the habit of writing? Do you like write every day or?
Yeah, I mean, I do need about a 4 hour window to be productive. Um, if I have sometimes I'll just if I only have like a little 90 minutes or something, I might not even focus on it. I'd like to have like a 4 hour window. But yeah, I try to I try to be disciplined in the mornings and nothing too early. I'm not waking up with the birds or anything like that, but just when my kid goes to school. And start my day. But that's my one stickler. If I can't get a good chunk of time, I've found that I'm not productive. And then I think like, well, if I have 90 minutes, maybe I should go to the gym. you know, instead
Yeah.
of instead of if I don't have the 4 hours. But yeah, but I mean, but also the book process was such a new thing for me, and it did take adjusting to that slow count, and just it was kind of just getting okay with like, okay, I did a page, I did a
Mhm.
page today.
Mhm.
I did a page and a half. Okay, great. Oh, I did 3 pages. Great. And just being adjusting to it. I do feel like having done it though once, um, it's sort of I was trying to make a comparison to it to a friend about like I have a friend who runs marathons and they don't really train anymore because they know how to pace themselves. They do like four marathons a year or something. And I was like, well, how do you run? And they're like, I just run like 3 miles a day, but when the marathon comes, I know how to pace myself. And I do feel a little bit like that now about the next book
Mhm.
is I know that it can end, you know,
Yeah.
you know, and B, understanding kind of like the process and the pacing of it and not to lose myself uh in depression over it, you know.
So like for us, just out of curiosity, for a screenplay, like how many words is a typical average movie screenplay?
Well, I don't know words. You don't count by words, just the page. I mean,
Yeah.
there's nothing like being in a room with somebody who, when you hand them a script, flips to the last page and just tries to see how long it is. That's pretty common. Um, so they're typically between 90 and 120 pages, and it's sort of the idea is it's about a page a minute, kind of like roughly. averages out. But it's I feel like screenplays have gotten a little more literary in the past 10 years, and so it wasn't that huge of a jump, but you do have to be more economical. I mean, that's the true art of it is finding a way to craft a scene tonally, um, timing wise, and still be economical and make whoever's reading it really feel like it's alive. I always go back to Alex Garland, Annihilation, beautiful scripts, like just to really learn. Um, you see everything, and it's not long in its descriptions, but yeah.
And is this something now with since you have the context and experience, are you trying to get Brooklyn Motto now back into film or
Yeah,
movie or?
I have to do it was, I was just talking to my manager and I was like, I'd like to send it out to everyone that the folks that, the kind of annoying industry term agents always use are your fans, your fans. Your fans are they're talking about like 35-year-old junior executives that don't get half of the references you make. Or it's probably three quarters. But so I am going to send it out, but I need to do what's called a one sheet to kind of be like, this is how I see it being a TV show.
Mm.
Do this. This will be the narrative thread, and please give it a read. So we're going to try, but I mean, TV is. I think everybody starts a conversation off about the current state of TV with TV is weird right now,
Mhm.
which basically means nobody. We're at about a 30% production rate of what we were before the strike, and it doesn't seem like it's really going to expand. So there's just not a lot of work. There's not a lot of shows. They're going back to a lot of reality stuff. So it's hard. Really got to break through with something to get it made, more so than ever nowadays. But yeah.
And so you mentioned that you are working on new books and new novels. Are you still?
I'm working, yes. So I'm work. I've got my spillage document is pretty deep on the next book, which would take place in 2000. And so I've got that going for the next installment of this series with Nico, the detective. So I have that. The process have made me kind of want to adapt some of my earlier work that didn't go anywhere in terms of like that I've always been a huge fan of in terms of my screenplay work. Maybe look into adapting some of my earlier work into novels. And now I have much to my agent's annoyance. Now when I have like new ideas, sometimes I'm like, I don't know, maybe that would work better as a novel
Yeah.
than a screenplay. So I have a few of those that I'm trying to process, and then I'm about to get started on a podcast that this Texas true crime podcast, which I've never written before. So that'll be interesting. But I
Cool.
think you got to kind of like as the TV and film industry collapses, I've got to find other ways to make a living.
Well, yeah, that's a great skill set to have, right? Survivability, adaptability.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I try.
yeah. So before I let you go, Alex, I was asking my guests I have a lot of aspiring writers. What advice would you give, especially if there's a screenwriter, filmmaker out there who's thinking about writing a novel?
Well, I'd say if you're a writer already, like don't let the imposter syndrome stop you. Like if you do anything with words, I'm a huge advocate. If you're a lawyer, if you're like, I don't know, you're a copy editor, like if you're able to express yourself through words, you can write a novel. You know what I mean? Like that's the hardest thing is figuring out how to express information clearly. All you need to do is read a paper, a college level paper to understand like how it's actually it's a skill, it's a rare skill. So I suffer from pretty horrific imposter syndrome my whole life. And we were talking before we started recording about the blurbs, and it's amazing. You go out to get the blurbs, and then you get a blurb, and then you feel good about yourself for 5 minutes, and then you're like, where's the other 10? So yeah, so I would just like if you write, you're a writer, just and obviously read. And I always tell people, and if anybody's interested in figuring out how to be a screenwriter, I'm not a big fan of the save the cat type stuff. It's not really how I work. If it works for you, great. It doesn't work for me. Um, but really want to understand the concept of beats and rhythms and how things work in scripts. I always recommend that people watch a movie that they've seen before that they love with their laptop open with the screenplay in front of them.
Hmm.
And as things are going, they scroll, read it, watch, read it, pause. What's going to happen is you're going to see that big things happen at the same times in almost all the movies you're watching. Like, oh, the page 32.
Hmm.
That's when the big thing happened. And then it'll happen like between page 29 and 36 in every single movie you're watching. And it'll just teach you to kind of like figure out, you should do your own thing, but it is kind of there is a language that you have to be able to speak and a rhythms that as the audience is used to experiencing, and so you've got to kind of like hit those things. But mainly, my big thing is try to shut up your imposter syndrome. I'm saying that more to myself probably, but I think that's the biggest hurdle was the biggest hurdle for me in terms of novel writing, and it'll come back once I start writing the new one.
All right, Alex, follow. Where can the listeners find you? Like a website, social media, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so on Instagram, I got off Twitter. So I'm on Instagram, I'm at Hacienda Films, and at Blue Sky, if you search Hacienda Films, I'll come up. And yeah, and so the book is Brooklyn Motto. If you go to brooklynmotto.com, there'll be a link to order it, all the usual places. If you want to watch Two Step, it's available out there on all the rentals. I think it's on Prime. It's on iTunes and Prime and Google Play. But yeah, so
All
that's
right.
it.
All right, cool. Well, thanks so much, Alex, for being on the podcast. Nice talking to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Alan.